Hi everyone, I'm Dimitri and welcome back to DimitriTube. In this video today, I'm going to give you all the ins and outs of moving to Washington, D.C. Okay, before I get started on the video, a lot of you guys are probably gonna wonder who is my friend here to the left. Well, my friend Sean, he's also my roommate. He was out drunk one night and he actually spotted this in the trash and was like, hey, that would be really good with the apartment. We haven't named the duck yet, but if you guys have any suggestions on a name, please post below in the comments. Back to moving to Washington, D.C. Currently, it is March 2020, and yes, I am currently in my home right now, social distancing because of coronavirus.
Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real!
So I'm from Northern Virginia, Woodbridge specifically. I only moved 20 miles away. So I decided to move because before I moved to Washington, D.C., I was living at my dad's house. I lived at my dad's house for like 5 years, and during that time I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, saving money, paying off debt, etc. Also, the cost of living in this area is very high, so I really was not in a rush to move. I googled it and it's the number 5 most expensive city in the United States. So unless you live in New York, Boston, San Francisco, or Honolulu, this city is more expensive than wherever you're coming from. So I live in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath with a roommate, and the apartment is roughly 650 square feet. I pay $1,000 a month plus utilities, and my roommate pays a little bit more because his room is a little bit bigger. Also, this building is somewhat older. I think it's almost 100 years old, and the appliances are not updated. We have a white refrigerator.
What is this, honey? I was shocked, honey. I was in tears almost. And it has a white refrigerator. I was like, oh, not a white refrigerator.
Yes, a white refrigerator. But on the bright side, we live in a very awesome location, Columbia Heights. Okay, so I'm gonna start from describing possible places to live from most budget friendly to least budget friendly. So one of your options when moving to DC is living in a group home. A group home is just a single family home and then you split the cost of the home with roommates. I don't know why, but a lot of people just call it a group home here, but typically it'll be like a row house, a townhouse, or just a regular house, and you're gonna split the cost with roommates. You will have between 3 to 7 roommates. Again, it just depends on the house. So for pricing, I've seen as low as like $750 per room up to like $1,400 per room. Let me say that again, just in case you did not catch it. That is $1,400 per room. So not $1,400 for the whole house, $1,400 per room. There are a lot of places in the United States where you can rent out a whole apartment for $1,400, sometimes even a whole house, but not Washington, D.C. Next is studios. So Washington, D.C., there aren't that many studio apartments. They're gonna be in the more popular parts of the city. Just cause I don't know, the city just did not build a lot of studio apartments. And also I don't really have many friends who live in studio apartments. I've honestly only met a few people who live in a studio. Start at roughly $1,600 plus utilities. And again, keep in mind that is the low end. One of my friends that did have a studio, this was like 3 years ago. It was off 17th Street near DuPont. They were paying $1,900 for that studio. And honestly, it was probably like 500 feet. Okay, next are 1-bedrooms. 1-bedrooms in Washington, D.C. typically range from $1,800 to $2,500. This just depends on how new the building is, the size of the apartment, and what amenities the building offers. Next is 2-bedroom apartments. I feel like the majority of young people in Washington, D.C. opt for a 2-bedroom apartment because the price can range anywhere from like $2,200 to like roughly $4,000, and you just split the cost with a roommate. Now, the reason why this is such a great option is because you can find like an older space, but in a great location, which is what I do. Now, if you want a nicer, more luxury place, you will pay like $3,600. So split 2 ways, that's $1,800. And for that, you can be in a good location, have a secure building, have 2 bedrooms, and have your own separate bathrooms. 2 bedrooms is the option that most people do, because that way you don't have to opt for a lot of roommates like a group house. And then also you tend to save more money than a 1 bedroom. But keep in mind, for a 2 bedroom apartment, if you're paying less than like $3,300, you more than likely will have to share a bathroom with your roommate. Also, the building will likely be an older building. It's not going to be one of the more updated luxury buildings. Also, another thing you're going to see a lot in Washington, D.C., you will see a lot of couples who share a 1 bedroom. If you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend and y'all want to go in on a 1 bedroom, that's definitely another way to do it. But again, keep in mind, you have to live with your boyfriend or girlfriend. Some of you all may not be quite ready for that step yet. So when it comes to choosing an apartment, you have to decide what's most important to you. For me, location was the most important factor to me, because I wanted to be close to my friends. I wanted to be close to U Street for nightlife. Also for me, I work in Virginia, in Springfield, which is pretty deep into Virginia. So I needed a place that had fairly easy access to 95 South. So that left me with 3 neighborhoods: Columbia Heights, Capitol Hill, and Bloomingdale. Those 3 places have fairly easy access to 95 South, and they were within my price range. There are a lot of things to do in Washington, D.C. when there's not a COVID-19 pandemic going on. If you're the type of person who knows you're gonna be working a lot, or knows you're gonna have a very active social life, then I do recommend finding a cheaper place to live, because that way the money you save on rent, you could put it towards going out, you could put it towards your student loans, you could put it towards savings. If you're out a lot, you're not gonna be in your apartment a lot. If you're considering living in Virginia or Maryland, here's how it differs. If you plan on moving to Virginia, the locations in Virginia that are super close to DC, for the most part, they're just as expensive as living in DC. The prices start getting lower when you move further outside of the Beltway, like Fairfax, Springfield, Annandale. That's when the prices start getting cheaper. If you live that far out, it will be very inconvenient for you to get to and from Washington, DC. So if you're planning on moving to Maryland, overall the prices are a little bit cheaper than Washington, DC. Again, this depends on what part of Maryland you're in. I have never lived in Maryland. If you have a Maryland specific question, just post it below in the comments and I will try to answer it as best as I can. If I can't answer it, I'll ask one of my friends who lives in Maryland and get back to you. I think it just comes down to personal preference and your budget. For housing, I gave you guys a range of prices, but don't get me wrong, one of you may find an amazing deal, and if you do, I say hop onto it. So don't feel bound to the prices that I gave you. For instance, one of my good friends used to live in DuPont, and he was able to find a 1 bedroom apartment for $1,500 a month. This 1 bedroom apartment was in a basement. It had no windows, and to enter the apartment, you had to go through an alleyway. Because of that, the owners priced it a little lower than normal. But on the bright side, it was located in DuPont Circle. When it comes to location, you pretty much can't get any better than that. 2 more things I need to bring up about prices. 1 is rent control, and 2 is the other side of the Anacostia. There are rent-controlled apartments in Washington, D.C. I don't know anyone personally who has them, and I'm not sure how to get one. But if you live in Washington, D.C. and you do have a rent-controlled apartment, please post something below in the comments. My second point about prices is the Anacostia River. The price ranges that I gave apply to living west of the Anacostia River. If you live east of the Anacostia River on the Maryland side, prices on that side tend to be a lot lower. Okay, next topic, weather. To me, weather in Washington, D.C. really is not that bad. We have mild winters and hot and humid summers. People complain about the cold in the winter, but honestly, it's not that bad. We're not in Chicago, so in the wintertime, it usually stays around the 40s here, and it's March 2020 right now, and this past winter, it didn't even snow. Like, I think we may have gotten like 1 inch like a random Saturday, but that was it. This winter it didn't snow, but some winters we could get bad snow. Again, typical East Coast weather. It just depends on the year. One fantastic thing about this area and snow is that for the most part, if it snows here, the city shuts down. This is not Boston. This is not Chicago. For the most part, this area cannot handle snow very well. So if in fact we do get like more than like 3 inches of snow, for the most part, all the schools will be closed down. And if you have an option to telework, you'll be able to telework. Or if you have to come into the office, there's a good chance you won't have to come in for that day. Summers here are hot and humid, but again, I don't think it's too bad. Honestly, you will probably only notice if your building does not have AC, or if you have to work outside all day, honestly, you won't even notice. And mornings here are beautiful. In the summertime, every morning before 10 a.m., unless it's raining, it's gorgeous, literally picturesque weather. The only problem is a lot of people are up early and heading to work, so they probably don't even notice how nice the weather is. It can get very hot between 2 and 6 p.m., but you'll check the weather and be prepared for it. One last tip for the summer heat: a lot of the buildings in Washington, D.C. do not have central air. A lot of them will just have like an AC unit. I have asthma, so that kind of makes a difference. So having central air was important to me. But if you don't have central air and you do have just a window unit, the majority of the time you'll be okay. And if you are moving here from a completely different area, summertime is pretty much from June through September. If it's like early October and you're like, oh my God, where is fall? Like, why is it not cold yet? Well, for the most part, September here is still pretty much summertime. And also winter, for the most part, lasts from like January through March. So a lot of times March comes around and a lot of people will be like, oh my God, why is it still cold? Like, why is it still cold? I don't understand. Because it's March. Like, it usually doesn't warm up till more April, May. Today is March 22nd and the high for today is 49 degrees. So it's pretty cold today. Transportation. If you live in Washington, D.C., like you're in the city, you can easily get away with not having a car. So if you're in Arlington, Silver Spring, Bethesda, Tacoma Park, Southeast or Northeast, but on the other side of the Anacostia River, like on the Maryland side, or anywhere near like the D.C. Maryland line, you can make it without a car, but it will be a little bit inconvenient for you. There are a bunch of public transportation options available: bus, metro, Uber, Lyft, bike, Capital Bike Share, scooters. In my opinion, the best ways to get around are by bike or by bus. If you plan on moving here and you know you're not gonna have a car, I do recommend, if you can, living closer to a metro stop or closer to a major bus route. But keep in mind, the closer your place is to a metro stop, the more expensive your place will be. And also, I have 3 major tips for the metro if you plan on riding the metro to work. Number 1, please do not stand in the left lane of the escalators. Do not do it. The left lane is the fast lane, the right lane is the slow lane. If you plan on getting on the escalator and just standing on it, stand on the right side. Do not stand on the left. The left is where people walk through and go quickly because they have places to be. Quick tip, do not be that tourist who stands on the left side. Tip 2, if you know you're gonna be taking the metro to work, I do recommend try living somewhere that you do not have to change trains. If you know you're gonna work off the yellow line, try to live somewhere off the yellow line. Again, this is not always feasible, but again, do your best because changing trains during rush hour, it kind of sucks. Last tip number 3. If you plan on taking the metro to work, keep in mind the metro is not cheap. It's actually kind of expensive. So if you live in another major city with a rail system, for example, the subway in New York. In New York City, the subway, to ride any one ride is $2.75. It's a flat rate. Well, in DC, to ride the metro, it is not a flat rate. The rate depends on the time of day and the distance you're going. For example, I live in Columbia Heights and if I were to take the metro to work, I would go all the way to the Franconia Springfield metro station. So keep in mind, if you work like roughly 9 to 5 hours, that's considered peak hour. So for me to take the metro from Columbia Heights to Springfield, it's about $6.50, and that's one way. So to take it there and back, that's $6.50 there and $6.50 back. So that adds up to like $13 a day, which for a commute, that's kind of expensive. Driving. So if you decide to move here, Traffic here is an absolute nightmare. Traffic here is horrible, and it's probably just as bad as like New York or LA. As I told you earlier, I used to live in my dad's house in Woodbridge, and pretty much all of my friends live in Washington, D.C., and I cannot tell you how many countless hours I spent just sitting in traffic trying to get to and from DC. Just even thinking about it, it really makes me sad. If you plan to be in the city a lot, I recommend just living here versus having to commute back and forth outside of the city. So if you need to go somewhere, it is very common that you will pull up Waze on your phone, put in your destination that's 4 miles away, and Waze will tell you it's gonna take you 30 minutes to get there. Again, traffic here is horrible, so if you're from somewhere that the traffic isn't as bad, you definitely need to factor that in. Parking. Parking in Washington, D.C. is pretty terrible as well. If you need to park from Monday through Friday, like 9 to 5, pretty much there is parking available, but you will pay for it. If you bring a car, you have two options. You can pay for a space or you can park on the street. If you pay for a parking spot, they're roughly $200 a month. Again, you can find some parking spaces that are a little bit lower, some that are a little bit higher. Again, it mainly just depends on where you're living. The more popular areas like DuPont, Mount Vernon, downtown are definitely gonna cost a little more than other parts of the city. So personally, I just park on the street. I like to save my $200, but also I do have an older car, so me parking on the street really doesn't matter. If you do drive a nicer car, there is a good chance your car could get dinged up parking on the street. But again, parking on any street, that could happen. If you just moved to DC and you know you're gonna be parking on the street, but you're not ready to change your tags yet, you can get a temporary parking decal from the Metropolitan Police Department. I think you just have to prove that you moved here, but that temporary decal will last you for like 3 months. If you do decide to live further out, for example, in Silver Spring or Arlington, but in an apartment complex, they do charge for parking. Usually it is not included with the rent. Now, whatever city you move to, you can meet shitty people or you can meet good people, and Washington, D.C. is no different. If you're worried about making friends, if you move here and you put in the effort, you will make friends. Some ways to make friends: you can join an organization or join a sport. There are plenty of them in Washington, D.C. They have basketball, volleyball, soccer. Some of the organizations are DC Fray, Zog Sports, and there's a LGBTQ one, Stonewall. Another great way to meet people is events from work. If you work in Washington, D.C. or nearby, such as Bethesda, Silver Spring, or Arlington, there's a good chance that your job will hold work events, and people actually go to these work events, network, and it's a great way to meet people. And another fantastic way to make friends is by having a roommate or living in a group house. When looking for a roommate or a group house, try to find one where they're also new to the city and they're looking to make friends as well as roommates. So for me, I had a few friends already who lived in the city, but I decided to play Stonewall kickball, and from playing kickball, I made a bunch of friends. And last tidbit about the people: Washington, D.C. is an intellectual hub. That means people here are smart. When you move here, you will meet a lot of lawyers, a lot of people with postgraduate degrees, and a lot of people who went to top-ranked institutions. On my kickball team, out of like 20 people, 15 of them had master's degrees or higher. Last little bit of advice: if you're planning on moving here and you do not have a job, I suggest waiting a little bit until you have a job or until you have something lined up. There are a lot of jobs in this area, but depending on how high demand your field is, it can take up to 3 to 6 months to get started at your job. And this is a very expensive place to live without a job for 3 to 6 months. So I doubt this will factor in to your decision whether or not to move to DC, but it is kind of important. In Washington, DC, you don't have any rights. Washington, D.C. stands for District of Columbia. So it is not a state, it's a district. And because of that, we don't get as many voting rights. And yes, I had to call my friend Eric to explain this to me. So in the United States, every single state gets 2 senators and representatives based on their population. Since Washington, D.C. is not a state, we don't get none of that. All we get is there's like one person who sits, but they don't get to vote. So as it stands right now, a lot of people in D.C. are trying to push to become a state, but so far it's not working. DC pays a lot in taxes, more than multiple states, and yet they're not represented in Congress. Hence, taxation without representation. Okay, I know that was a lot of information, but that is all I have for you guys today. Again, if there is something I did not cover or you have a question, please feel free to leave something in the comments. And also make sure to pound that like button and pound that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.